Well, thank you all for coming. My name is Marty Blatt, and I direct the public history program here at Northeastern. It's my honor today to introduce our speaker, Aron Greenfield, and his talk is part of Northeastern Holocaust Awareness Week. We're sad to report that due to the death of her husband, very recent, Anna Ornstein will be unable to present as scheduled and as the publicity went out that you might have seen. Before introducing Aron, I just want to very briefly direct your attention to your program, which includes information about our two remaining events. Tomorrow evening will feature the Boston premiere of a documentary film scripted by Philip Sands, What Our Fathers Did, A Nazi Legacy. Sands will be present to discuss the film after the screening. And then Thursday night, our culminating event of this week of activities, Sands will lecture on the topic, East-West Street, a personal account of genocide and crimes against humanity. All the logistical details for those programs for these two events are in your program, so please do take a look, and we hope to see you at those events as well. It's my pleasure now to briefly introduce Aron, and then he will speak. And he'll speak for approximately 45 minutes, and we'll have plenty of time for your brief questions so we can get as many questions and responses as possible. Aron was born and raised in a small town near Krakow, Poland, only a few miles from the border with Germany. He was 13 years old and living with 9 family members when Germany invaded Poland. His family was split up. Some were forced to live in a ghetto, sharing space with 6 or 7 other Jewish families, while others were transported to concentration camps. Greenfield lived in the ghetto with his mother and a few of his sisters. However, his time there ended when the Nazis took him and his sister Sarah to a concentration camp. Aron and Sarah were the sole survivors of their family. They endured life in 9 different concentration camps before Allied troops liberated the last camp, freeing them. Greenfield and his sister resettled in Massachusetts a few years after their liberation. His sister died 6 years ago. She had chronically poor health as a result of the war. Aron and his wife, Martha, for the last 42 years, have managed the Brenner's Children's Shop in Norwood, where they sell First Communion dresses and Boy Scout uniforms. So if you're in that area, go down and take some business his way. Their daughter, Nadine Greenfield Binstock, works for the American Jewish Committee in Washington, D.C. And Aron was telling me he feels compelled to relate his story so that this history will be remembered. And in service to that goal, he has spoken at many schools. So please join me in welcoming Aron Greenfield.
Okay, well, some of you have mentioned about me. Anyway, I was born in 1926, which makes me to be 90 years old. I just had a birthday in July, and last July. I wanted to also mention, in order to get to the concentration camp, you heard about the selection going left and right. I come from 9 children. My oldest brothers were already in a camp, in a work camp, concentration camp. 3 of them were already in camp. My father was already in camp. I was in the ghetto with the rest of the smaller children. I was the oldest boy of the camp. My sister was older. She was with us too. Anyway, when the selection came, I stood there. One morning, first of all, let me tell you about what happened. First of all, where I lived in Strakowa, in the Polish town near Krakow. we lived, and all of a sudden, one morning, the Germans marched in. I know they were ready anyway, but the Nazis came into our house. Everybody aroused, get out, outside. Leave everything behind, take whatever you belongs to you. You're going somewhere, better place. That's what they said. And right away, they gave some of the people that were not Jewish, Polish people, to take any furniture they want that was ours and take what they want, and they let us take just what we carried in our hand. Can you hear me? Okay?
In the back?
It's okay. It was so fast. By the time we turned around, we were already on a truck, or I don't remember if it was a truck or horse and buggy or something. Only 3 kilometers away from my house, there was prepared a ghetto. I just want you to know what a ghetto is. A ghetto is a very simple situation. Now, you take, for instance, America. You find the Irish people that are Catholic, not by choice, they want to live together. So they go to the same church. The Jews the same way, Brookline or Newton. Why? Because the synagogue is nearby, so he can walk to it or whatever. So once you have this kind of a situation, it's very simple to take all those people that lived more or less together, and you tell them, take what you have, and they brought us about only 3 miles away from our house. I think it was on a truck or something like that, with just the belongings, and they gave about 5 houses that they emptied, which were farmers, basically. They gave them better housing, and they told us empty everything out, and they stuck us into that housing. For instance, in a 2-bedroom apartment in Poland was very little. They stuck in my whole family, which was at that time, my brothers were already in a concentration camp. My father was in a concentration camp. I was the oldest boy. My sister was the oldest girl. And anyway, only 6 of us, my sister, 2 sisters, and the little brother, 5 of us were left. Or 6, I can't. Anyway, my sister, myself, and my 3 little brothers, and another sister. All of us lived in a house, in a little room. Let's say this room was much lower, of course. You could have about 3 families. In Poland, 3 families was a lot of kids. They stuck you in like an animal. I mean, you slept on the floor, you slept on top of each other. It just, they didn't care. Finally, they gave me a chance to go to sleep on an attic. So me and my friend, named Michael, anyway, we got this place, so we didn't live there together, but we also had very little room, and we got a job right away. In that place, I worked in a tannery. I was only, at that time, 14 years old, 14 and a half or something like that. I worked in a tannery, sweeping blood from the animals, whatever it was. And after 12 hours, I went back to the place. We were already starving. Starvation was already in the ghetto, in my ghetto anyway. Sometimes a small ghetto was worse than a big ghetto in Warsaw, because you had some kind of a community together, you had some leaders. Over there, nobody cared, and nobody didn't care. Anyway, to make this story short, we were very starving. I remember one day, somehow my mom got a hold of a bread. In Poland, a bread was like weighing almost 3 pounds or so. And she said, go ahead. And I was home by myself with her. And she said, if you're hungry, take it, because otherwise it's going to go I started to eat. I ate the whole bread. I felt so bad because I didn't leave anything for the kids. My mother practically cried in front of me because she saw I was so hungry and I was skinny already. I hate to talk about it because I remember that. Anyway. Well, to be honest with you, the ghetto was so bad that when it came to concentration, when they said everybody out 5 months later, or something like that, they stood us up and they said, everybody out. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning, and stand up straight. We know everybody land up here. Women on this side, children on that side, men and boys on that side. As you call, you probably heard sometimes about the selection. That's what the selection was about. Rechts, links, right, left. Women, they looked at you like an animal. You could, like a horse that can still walk or run. And I stood, and my mother said to me, put on those long pants I gave you. And I didn't know what she said. Why? It's summertime, it's June. Put them on so you look older. And if they ask you, tell them you're 16 and I was only 15. I lied my age to get into that paradise called concentration camp. My first concentration camp, people say, oh, did you go to Auschwitz or whatever? There were 2,000 concentration camps in Poland. Not just 1 or 2. The bigger ones everybody remembers. I was in 9 of them. If they finished a job in one of them, my first concentration camp was about maybe 20 kilometers away from the ghetto. And I was there working in a factory, what do you call it? What do you call the stuff that you throw on the ground so that it would grow better? Fertilizer. They didn't give us any gloves. When I came home, my hands were black, my face was black, my hair, everything else. And they didn't care. I was there for about 2 months. One of my friends woke up in the morning. He was a skinny skeleton. In the morning, he woke up that fat. We didn't understand, nobody cared. Nobody didn't understand why. It was from the dust or whatever had happened to him. He was eating too much salt, he was hungry, so he was grabbing, we had some salt on hand, no food. This was only in the, you could say it was right in Poland, which was a factory where Germans were working. This used to be Germany, that town used to be Germany before 1914, you know, like that. And the people that I worked with were all basically Germans and Polish, but civilians. They had gloves, they had masks, they didn't give us anything. And I don't want to change the subject, but I just want you to remember, when somebody tells you, and he's from Germany, he says, we never knew. Tell him he's a liar, because they saw us marching in the street to camp, to work in many camps with German shepherds. One, I think I can tell you, my brother David, he was much taller, stronger, but he didn't care anymore. He jumped out of line because we walked with the Germans in the main streets, and the German shepherd on the side, if you made a move, the German shepherd would grab you. And he saw a piece of grass. He was going to catch it so he can eat it. They beat him so hard, it was just unbelievable. Finally, myself and my brother was with me then. 3 of us were together in that same camp. We picked them up and said, make sure you start walking because they're going to shoot you. Anyway, he survived till the 4th camp. And I'm skipping an awful lot. I could speak for 3 hours if I were to go. I mean, like, you know, it's just so much to tell you, but I'm just giving you highlights of the situation. And in one of the camps, I was with my brother. It was my 5th camp, which was called Fünf Teichen. In German, it means the 5 water, like a, I don't know. Yeah, something like that. So anyway, in that camp, I was the youngest. I was there with my brother, Yossel, Joseph, and David. They were stronger, taller. They were older than I was. My brother was 15 months older. My other brother was 3 years older. And they called me out. They always made selections. Let's see who can still work, because by that time they already needed help. They didn't want to kill you if you could still work, because we actually did help the Germans, when trying to win the war, because they needed us to do it. So anyway, I was so weak that they said it was a selection again, and they never told you where you're going. My brothers didn't know where I went. They figured they'll never see me again. They were right, because they died and I did not. But that's another story, because what they did, they sent me to a camp which worked, a camp where I was stuffing bullets with yellow powder, whatever that is, I was all yellow because they never gave you any stuff to cover you up or something. And I started, and by that time, I didn't see my brothers anymore. I found out after the war they were still alive until April of 1945. The war ended May 8. I was there until May 8 was the last one. Auschwitz, I envied them because they were liberated in January of 1945. In my camp, the last one, between between January and April 1945, in my camp were 6,000 people, inmates, whatever you call it. I'm sorry, not inmates, criminals, I'm sorry. That's what we were, private criminals. After all, after all, you're a Jew, you're a criminal. So so I was so weak already, and so they gave me that job, and I survived because from that job they needed, so I went to another place, and I worked in a factory, and also I was a riveter on tanks, on German tanks. And then there was another camp. The last one was called Gorlitz. That was the worst camp. I may go back telling you because I'm trying to remember everything, so I'm going back and forth. But basically, you get the idea what camps were like, what life was like in the camps. And many a times people ask me, why didn't you fight back? At the first selection, going back from the ghetto, I'm going back, and they asked me that question in the ghetto, you stood there, why didn't you fight back? I said, how do you fight back if you're standing in front of your mother and your brothers and sisters, and they says, you make one move, and they all die, or we hang him in front of everybody so you can see what's going to happen to you if you don't do it. So you could not fight back. And where was I? Anyway, so in that camp, I went from that camp to another camp, and the last one, I may go back and forth, but that's the last camp. I just want to tell you because that's where I was liberated from that camp. The last camp was a horrible camp too. And people say, how did you survive? Well, it must have been, I was smart enough to do something. I pick up languages very well. I speak German fluent. I'm forgetting a little bit of it. And I felt so weak, I said, I have nothing to lose. She said, well why didn't you, people say, commit suicide or something. It's not that easy. You think about it. If I commit suicide, what's going to happen to the rest of my family and all that stuff? You didn't know if they're alive or not. I was so weak because we used to walk 10 miles every way because the Germans were already being invaded by Russia, the Russian front. And every time the Russians came forward, closer to our camp, they took us out because they needed us in case they pushed the Russians back, which they did many times. So that's I would call it the death march. So they took us from that camp into a farm, and it was in January. The snow was deep. We had wooden shoes or no shoes. We walked 10 kilometers, and on the way, people were dying left and right. If you die, and there was like in mountains over there walking, where we were walking. I had a Ukrainian, which was a Nazi sympathizer, couldn't even speak German. He killed my friend in front of my eyes. Just so much for that. I'm talking about people should help people. You don't help the enemy. You don't, many a times, if the Polish people would have learned, or somebody would have told them, help the Jews, they can help you, we can help each other. But instead, they lost Poland in no time, in 3 days. This is political. I'm just trying to say what happened. But anyway, in that camp, I got this idea. I walked one day to work, and I said, I'm not going to make it one more time. And I saw this guy that was a German. He was a German criminal from before the war, and he was in charge of our camp. He was not a Jew. He was a German, and not in uniform, just private. And he was like maybe 50 years old at the time, and they said that he was in jail for 20 years before he came to camp. And he used to walk around, and I one day said to myself, this guy is crazy. I have an idea. I have nothing to lose. If he shoots me or kills me, so be it. By that time, I was too weak. I couldn't walk anymore. And the food was horrible, lice and dirt and cold barracks. And I said, that's it. So I went to the infirmary. You could do that because they figured if the doctor says that you're not strong enough, they'll just shoot you. So I went to this doctor, and he was also an inmate, but he was a Hungarian Jew, didn't speak German at all. And I took the thermometer, put it on my arm to see the temperature. I told him I have a temperature, So he says, so he knew what I was doing. He told me, they're going to kill you. He said he couldn't speak Yiddish or German or anything except Hungarian. I don't speak Hungarian. So I said, I don't care. I said, it's okay. So I showed it, I rubbed it, and it became like 42 degrees or whatever, which is 102 or 101. And so I stayed back. And the reason I did that is because the kitchen was not too far from there. And I watched the people in the kitchen working, and usually they rest at 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock to prepare for dinner, and then they go for dinner. And I said I could sneak in and steal some potatoes, or right from the kettle, hot or cold or whatever. That's exactly what I did. So I grabbed a broom from outside, it was outside there, and I started to sweep in front of the kitchen. And the German crazy guy walked by. He says, "Was machst du da? What are you doing here?" I said, "You told me to sweep the floor, over here." And I did. He hit me a couple of times with his whip. "Mach schnell, work fast. Hurry up." And that's the first day I already went to the kitchen. I was small, and they were sleeping, and I stuck my hand into the kettle, and I grabbed a hot potato right out of the kettle. That's like penicillin to you, because you have that and you start living. Food. Nobody in this country knows what food is, except when he goes on a hunger strike for 1 week, or 1 day rather, or something like that. But to starve all the time, it's just unbelievable. I did this. The next day he saw me again. So I said, you told me to sweep the floor here, so I'm sweeping. And I got myself a job, this, and also in the laundry. The uniforms that we had were full of lice. You know, you have any idea what lice on clothes is? People only know about this. Oh yeah, head lice. That's kids play. I mean, that's on a Sunday when we had a day off. You sit there and grab the lice and try to kill them one by one so you can put your shirt on. I hope somebody understands what I'm talking. Do you follow this? I mean, because you guys don't know except for head lice. Well, this was lice all over. They eat you up alive practically, bite and everything else. So I got this job cooking lice, as they say, cooking the uniforms. That's all they did, is just throw them into hot water and take them out and dry them, and you wear them again. And on Sunday, if we had a day off, everybody would stand there and just kill the lice. There was, and because you couldn't get food or something like that. You got your regular thing. You had a Sunday off. It's 6 days Sunday off, and Sunday they used to either shave you everywhere, not just the head, but anywhere. It doesn't matter. The people that shaved you were other inmates. They used to be barbers from before the war, and that was their job. So then again, if he wasn't your friend, he could hurt you. And if he knew you had a piece of bread, he says, I'll do you good if you give me a piece of bread, or something like that. That's another story. But anyway, from that point on, I started to steal potatoes, and then I started to switch the potatoes for soup with other guys because they wanted the potatoes, and I would hold the soup and sell it to people. I call them idiots because there were cigarettes and they were smoking, and they starved to death and smoked. So I would buy the cigarettes from them because I don't smoke, but the cigarettes I can hold on and run a business slowly, because with the cigarettes I can say, give me your bread, So I started to gain weight. So my last camp, the reason I survived, and another 2,000 out of 6,000 died by beatings and by starvation, because I had that last camp, that last job that I had, and I was inside, and I was finding cigarette butts, and I would hold them, sell them for cigarettes, for other cigarettes, or something like that, and just so I can swap him for something else. You couldn't save him in the barracks because they'd steal it from you. So it's bread. And when the survival, I was liberated by the Russians. And one thing I can tell you, I saw revenge at least, because the Russians suffered. So they took revenge. I met some Americans in a displaced person camp after the war, and I talked to some of them, or heard stories about them, even in this country. I said, oh my God, they're such nice people. Of course, in a nice uniform, they're clean, beautiful looking, and all that. You should meet them in a concentration camp, then you find out. You don't know a person till you live with them in a desert or in a place like that. Then you know. Then you find out that the priest or the rabbi is not the same person that you thought he was. Because we saw a rabbi and a priest in a concentration camp, because there were Polish people in concentration. There were some Polish people in concentration camps too, because they were political. And they would beat you to death. I mean, and those are the things. After that, when I was liberated, the Russians came into the camps, and I enjoyed, because I enjoyed, they took revenge of those Nazis that kept us there. They made them pick up, crap with their hands. I mean, they did unbelievable things to them because that they deserved it. You know what I mean? It just, and the Americans came in, oh my God, they looked at me. Of course, I didn't look as beautiful as he did. So I am the pig, and the German is the nice guy. You know, so the Germans, every one of them in our camp, when they escaped, when the war was over, I was there to the last day of the war. The 8th of May, I was liberated. They escaped the 7th of May into the American zone. They had a way of doing it. They left from that, and they probably could have been your next door neighbor in this country. And that's so much for fairness and stuff like that. You see, it just, it's amazing. And I just want to tell you, I know Germans, I know Poles, I know, it depends who they are, not where they're from. You've got to judge them individually, separately, and that's when you know we had people that risked their lives, some Polish people that risked their lives, helping and saving them, keeping them in the basement or something, or whatever. And there were Polish people. I give you an example. I went to school with a kid, and I went to a school where there was a cross right on the thing because it was a small town. And when I came in, there were only 7 Jewish kids of a class of 65 or so. Because in Poland, the classes are not like here. 65 people was in a class, you know. And I never realized it. And being from a religious home, like my father had a beard, and he was a very educated man, but he did what his father told him to do. And sometimes people ask me, are you religious? I said, every time I am, I said, why am I doing it? And every time I'm not, I said, why don't I? So it's very questionable. I mean, it just, I don't know what to say. So I'll leave it at that. People ask me, do you believe in God? Well, find him for me, so I'll let you know what I can tell you. Because I was looking for him all the time. I have to see, I couldn't tell this. I don't know what to say. There's much more to say. I can also tell you different things about, let me go back who I am, how how many minutes do I have?
You're good. We can go to questions soon, but go ahead.
Okay, no. I've because I wanted to, I didn't tell you what my home was like. We were 9 children. My father was a religious man, but he also was an educated man, and so was my mother, not because usually Polish Jews, if they were under the Russian rule, didn't go to school because if you saw a fiddle on the roof, you get an idea what I'm talking about. It was that kind of a thing. But my parents were born under the Austrian-Hungary Empire. They had the chance to go to school, and they finished school, and they spoke German, Polish, Yiddish, and Hebrew. I mean, all of those languages. But in the same time, we were restricted to a certain way, and I came from that kind of a family. We were 9 children. My parents were in business until 1936. They had a business that was about 20 kilometers away from our home, and they took my town was little, but it was a very important town because we had buses going to Krakow and other towns, and a railroad thing that people from half of the country had to pass our railroad. So it was a nice little town, and some of the people were nice, and some people were just horrible because they were ignorant. And I started to say something. See, that's why I say you have to nudge me, go back to the other one, because I'm 90, so sometimes I forget. What's your name again? You know what I mean? So this is what happens. I know what happened yesterday, but I forget what just happened a minute ago. But anyway, so what did I say? See what I mean? What did I just...
Talking about your town being a transit.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so when I came back from the concentration camp, I went to my town, Strakowa, whatever, near Krakow, and to find out, I didn't want to believe that my brothers were dead, but I was almost sure that they were. Something wrong?
No, we're just running the pictures. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so I traveled all the way from Poland on a freight train for free, more or less, and it took me 2 days to go 150 kilometers to my home. I wanted to find out if anybody's alive to go back to my town where we lived. It makes sense to me. When I came back, I found my sister. Her name is Sarah, and she survived. And when I walked in, and she already found out about an hour before that I'm alive, somebody told her. Anyway, before I want to tell you this, I came to the station, we had a very nice railroad station which combined with a lot of other towns. So I got off the train and I see this guy, he walks over to me, he looks at me, "You look familiar. Are you Greenfield?" I said, "Yeah." "Oh my God, son of a gun, you're still alive, huh?" Like they say, he was a Polish guy, an anti-Semite, as they say, whatever. I was so angry, and I had this mandolin that I organized because the Germans left, so the doors were empty, and the houses were empty, so you took what you wanted, wherever you carried. But I don't play a mandolin. I just took it. No one gets there. I'll take it. I'll sell it if I need it, whatever. I took it and I hit him right over the head. He was so shocked that he says, "Imagine that, a Jew hitting back." And this is, when I see what's going on now in this country and I see Israel fighting back, I say to myself, I'm so glad I'm alive to see it, that the Jews finally hit back when somebody hits them, and we know how. Well, you were looking at, is there any more time I have?
Why don't we take 5 more minutes, and then we'll go to the
Okay,
questions and discussion.
okay.
Go ahead.
Let me see now. I told you about this here. Anyway, by the way, I went to school in a Polish school, and I told you I never realized there was a cross over there because it was a small town, and it was tough. 7 Jewish kids and 60 of non-Jews, and I had to run for my life every day because they were running after me because I had sideburns, and they were a kippah, And so life was miserable. I started so much to hate the idea. The first thing I always said to myself, where's God? Supposing, where's God? Is there a God? And so forth. And many of the Jewish people, many of the young people started to turn the other way. Many Holocaust survivors are not very strong believers because of what happened to them. And they do not depend on the religion to help them or God to help them. So they're doing the right thing by helping themselves. And then will God help you, as they say. So I remember going to school, and I remember suffering all the time. I went to a Jewish school, and after that to this, and I watched the non-Jews being always 5 inches taller than I was. And the reason was very simply, I never got any exercise, because that's all I did, is pray, because my parents were religious, his parents were religious, and so people many times ask me, are you religious? When I'm not, I decided, gee, why am I not? After all, there is a God, but I don't know where he is, but I believe in the 10 Commandments. If we could all do that, maybe there'll be peace in the world. And but that doesn't happen. Okay. Okay.
So I'm going to ask those of you who have questions or brief comments to use this since we are recording the event. And we're running, Aron brought photos, family photos. The earlier ones they're in sequence. I think you could sort of tell. And then there he is as a younger man. Did you want to talk about the photos at all?
Yeah, tell them who they are and so forth.
Yes, yes.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah, you're on.
Okay. This is my sister that survived, but she, the one that's standing next to my mother with the armband, with the Star of David, which she had to use it. They smuggled, she did that during the war, which was unheard of. She knew the photographer and she took a picture. She had a feeling something is happening that is very bad. And she put the armband, you were supposed to use an armband all the time. So she evidently hid it by rolling up the sleeve, and then went to the photographer and then she took it and showed it to make sure. She had a feeling that we will not survive. And that's the picture done actually in 1940 or something like that. That's my sister that survived. She was in a camp, in one camp only. When I came home, I forgot to tell you that, I walked into a house. This is, I go from one to another. I heard that she's alive about a day before. I came in and she wasn't in our house because we didn't have a house. The gypsies took over during the war. So all the girls that survived lived in one place. They were scared to death of the Russian soldiers and stuff like that. It wasn't an American liberation. It was awful. So when I came in and I saw her, I couldn't recognize her. She was a beautiful woman. I mean, this was after the war, but she was tall and played basketball, and she was a very good-looking woman. I mean, she was always taller. I used to fight with her. I used to lose the fight because she was stronger than I was. She was taller than I was, too. And so when I came in and I looked at her, and I says, and she opened her mouth, no teeth at all. And she had a house, because she had teeth. Some of them were made, like in Europe, with gold and silver in it. The Germans took it out in the concentration camp, gave it to the Army and Navy, whatever it is, and she had no teeth. She had swollen legs because she worked, and she had to push a push cart or something, and she didn't have the strength, so she would use her legs with it. And she didn't work a day in her life in this country, not because she's lazy, she's just the other way around. She couldn't, and she didn't even go on welfare. Her husband worked in a meat company, making just a living, and she was home because arthritis all over, the feet were swollen, and she was more in bed than she was for the last few years than she was anywhere. Never went anywhere because of it, and that's a survivor. Okay. The next photo, that's my mother. This is a picture from before the war. She was a businesswoman also. At the same time, she went to the mountains because in Europe, if you had asthma, they said go to the mountains. It's probably the wrong way to do, but that's what she did. So she went for a couple of days and she took a picture. My sister, the reason I have those pictures is my sister worked on a machine, and she had one job all the time. She was very good at it. I don't know what the machine did. They were making some kind of pieces of iron or whatever, and she pushed with her legs, and she was all swollen. But in the same time, those pictures she brought with her to the concentration camp. She dug a hole under the ground and hid them. And after the war, she took them out. And this is so unbelievable, because otherwise I would have never known what my mother looked like. I mean, I would have just remembered what she looked like. That's about all. That's the only pictures I have from them. So, next one. That's me after the war. I was already well fed and already gained weight. And this was in Austria. We was in Austria in a DP camp. DP camp, a displaced person camp. I want you to know, displaced camp, if they were to tell me, I would live there all my life. To me, this was paradise in comparison to what I went through, because we got 3 meals a day, and in Austria in a camp, and it was a army camp taken over by us. So I got this job watching the grades, and they used to give me like I don't know, $2 a week or something for Coca-Cola or something. But I got 3 meals a day. And the first time I saw Americans in that camp, and I can go back over there if I want to. Anyway, yeah.
Are you getting tired?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Let's look at the last
Yeah.
3 pictures, and
Yeah.
then we'll take
Right.
questions.
Okay. That's also this is all done in Austria after the war, in a DP camp. Yeah.
And then can we get the next? Yeah. And this is the last picture.
And this is the last picture. This is my family now. And my daughter is anyway. With my daughter. My daughter's the last. Was my wife? He is not here. Oh yeah. Well, my grandson, he's 10 years old now. My son-in-law, he works in the Pentagon. They live in Washington, D.C. And my little grandson, his name is, anyway, so he's 2.5. And that's my granddaughter. She's like 8. And that's my daughter. And she's 40. She works for the American Jewish Committee. Okay.
Okay. So, all right. Let me start us off with some questions. Where just raise your hand and use this. Because he said he could have talked, Aron could have talked for 3 hours, so there's plenty of details that he didn't cover.
First of all, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I was wondering if you have been back to Poland since the war.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Okay. Yeah, I may have to repeat. So, if you've been back to Poland
Yes,
since
I-
the war,
yes,
so
I
why don't
have.
you talk about that?
I've been back in Poland. I've been there, I now I remember, I was there twice. I went back to Poland quite a few years ago, and I found my home, my house. We didn't have own a house, we just had an apartment. It was during the war, and the Russians took over Poland, and they gave these houses to different people, and I found out the house was all gone because the apartment, because gypsies lived there during the war, and everything we had was gone. And the situation in Poland, some of the people, the neighbors, they knew my parents, and they knew also some of my brothers. They went to school together with and all that. Some of them were very nice, but a lot of the Polish people were looking at us, and I speak Polish, so I said, "Oh, here come the Jews." Well, what I didn't understand, it wasn't so much this. They were afraid that many of us are coming back to get our house back or home back or something like that. I didn't come for that. As a matter of fact, I was in Poland, and a woman, I stayed with her. Her husband, which I never had a chance to meet because I went because of it, because he used to write about the Polish Jews of Poland, and especially about my town. So I wanted to meet him. By the time I got there, he already passed away because he was a very nice guy from what I understand. And his wife insisted, stay with us while you're here. It wasn't too far from Krakow, so I stayed there overnight, and during the day, I would take the train to Krakow and visit over there because there's nothing there. And also, after so many years, half of the people in my town were not people that I knew before the war because it was wartime. People moved to other states, other towns, rather. Okay.
Yes.
You said you were in Austria, and it was quite pleasant, if I heard you correctly. How long were you there before you came to the United States, and what was that transition like to come here?
Okay, I was in Austria in what they call a DP camp, okay? Displaced person camp. It was very nice because we lived in barracks. There used to be Austrian soldiers in there, and stuff was coming in. To me, this was fantastic. I got 3 meals a day. As a matter of fact, we lived in Austria for about. I'm glad you asked that. I lived in Austria, but we came from one part of. I smuggled the border from Poland to Czechoslovakia, and from Czechoslovakia to Austria. It was with the help of some underground from Israel or whatever. It was the Bricha, whatever they call them. Anyway, we smuggled the border and we came in, and we met this general, and they made provisions that we should go into a beautiful, because the hotels were empty, people didn't have money to go skiing and skating, because Austria was known like Switzerland. And where I was, it was very beautiful, but they gave us a hotel. So we had 2 families stayed in one room, which was, to me, this was luxury. But we didn't have furniture and stuff, but we stayed in a hotel for about almost a year. And then the economy started to get better, so they told us we have to move and have to give it back to the Austrian government and so forth, so they could do whatever they have to do. So we went from there to another camp near Linz, near the Russian border. Anyway, we went to another camp, and over there I was there for quite a few years. For a couple of years, I was there from 1947 to 49 for 2 years in a DP camp, and we had food. I had some kind of a job doing something, and I remember it's there that I met. Well, when I came to Austria, the first time I met an American, I'll never forget. He was a driver. He was a chauffeur of a general. They made a speech for us. And we were so surprised. We saw he was like 6'7". We don't see too many people like that. And he was big. He was African American, but he stood there and we looked and looked, and he says, "Oh my God." And of course he couldn't speak German, and I couldn't speak English, so there was no conversation. But basically, I'm just trying to tell you. And then my second thing I just want to tell you, to the bright side of it, I was walking the street, and all of a sudden at night I saw music, I heard music. It was a nightclub or some kind of a bar or whatever. And I said, "Gee, and I like dancing or something." And I looked around and I saw American dancing, jitterbug, Benny Goodman, something like that. I said to myself, "My God, this is a wild country. I don't want to go." I mean, you was throwing the girl in the air. I said, I only knew tango and stuff like that, you know what I mean? I said, "Oh my God." I couldn't watch. I was sneaking every day up there, and I watched them dancing. I said, "My God, this is unbelievable, the way they dance." And now I dance like that too.
When do I get my first dance?
You got it.
Thank you very much. I was wondering if, it's sort of a two-part question. Generally, do you see any disturbing parallels between current events in our country right now and the horrific experiences that the Jewish people went through. And so that's sort of general, but specifically, the picture of your mother showed her with the Jewish star. Hitler had instituted a Jewish registry. Do you have any concerns or opinions about our current president's suggestion that we establish a registry of Muslims, a different religion, but a registry? Do you have any concerns about the rise of the
ISIS.
white supremacists who have called themselves
You mean
the
like
alt-right,
Like David Duke?
and Steve Bannon? Yes.
And Steve, yeah.
So there was three.
It was actually a three-part question.
heard-
It was generally current events,
Current-
specifically registries based on a person's religion, and white supremacists.
Okay. Well, I can only tell you what I think. I'm worried about it. First of all, I like to say that I am not a religious man. I stopped being religious. Maybe if my parents were alive today, I probably would be religious just to respect them. But basically, what religion has shown me, reading books and seeing things, and to me, religion gives you a form how you should behave in general. But fanaticism in any religion, I would tell you this much: if anybody wants to be a fanatic, he better be a fanatic to himself. If he wants to push it on me, then I wouldn't want him in this country. So whether it's Muslim or Jews or anything, if you don't, this is the beauty of America. You have so many different people. In Poland, you had Poles and Catholics. So you dealt with people like that, you had only those kind of people. But over here, you have so many nationalities, it's kind of hard to shut the borders. And a Muslim should do okay. If he becomes very religious, that means he wants something from me that he wants me to do, and I don't want to do it.
Yeah,
And
I hear you
wouldn't want him
say,
here.
are you saying fundamentalism in any religion, whether it's
in any
Jews,
religion, yeah.
Muslims, Christians, is not a good thing?
If it's very fanatically religious, and especially if the same religion tries to impose something on me, I think we shouldn't even let them in, because that's exactly what we have now with ISIS. And I'm not talking about Muslims. Muslims, millions of Muslims in other countries. There are Muslims in India, there are Muslims everywhere. So that's not the problem.
You
The
are talking
problem
about
is
fanaticism being a problem.
fanaticism and people, the leaders of the Muslim religion, if they start preaching hate or something like it, or being pious to a certain religion, or being 100% that direction, I had enough of it. I suffered enough for it. So,
Do we have, oh, yeah.
Thank you, Aron. What a very powerful story of survival. I wonder if you could fill in some of the details. In particular, these were extraordinary losses that you suffered. When did you discover the fate of your parents? And can you share with us what happened to them? How many siblings died? And if you know how? And what that was like? And also how you got to the United States?
how did I get to the United States?
Yeah.
First was, when did you learn about your parents' death, and how many siblings died, and how, if you know how they died?
Well, I know, first I know in 1942, when there was the selection, I knew exactly, by that time, if you go to Auschwitz, you don't come back. Unless you are smart enough in Auschwitz and you're tall enough, and they would say to you, there's another selection. If my sister Deborah, which was a beautiful blonde, she could have passed as a German almost, but she was so honest and naive. But we told her, just like they told me, put your long pants on. And she was taller than I was. Even she was 2 years younger, exactly born the same month. And she could have said to them, I am 16. They look at you like at a horse. You look okay, you okay, to the left. There were many kids that survived at that age, and she was 2 years younger. What was the rest of the question? Also, when did I know?
When did you learn the fate of your parents?
I knew the minute I found out actually, and somebody came to our camp, to my sister's camp, and at that time they had in her camp, my sister's camp, they had a right to write a postcard, which was censored to me. And she wrote in that postcard to the effect, as a matter of fact, I have some postcards, I should have brought them on my mother's handwriting and everything, because my sisters saved it under the ground. She wrote in that letter, this woman that wrote in a letter to my sister, and my sister sent this letter through, she gave, a friend of hers had a right to write a letter to me because it was all censored. And she wrote that she didn't say that my parents died and the kids died and were killed or whatever, but she said, well, my parents said that you should say Kaddish. You should say the prayer of the dead. That means you couldn't say that for the Germans. The Germans didn't understand what that means. But I understood. That means say a prayer after them because they're already dead. So that's how I found out in the concentration camp. And plus, when I saw them going to the left and the right, the only time I could have said maybe they survived because my sister, the one that was taller, it could have in Germany, in Auschwitz, saying, they would have given her a job and she would have survived. Some people did survive.
And do you know how your siblings died and where? Do you have?
In Auschwitz, they were in the crematorium. They were just disposed
All
of.
of your siblings?
Yes.
And how did you get to the United States?
Oh, I got to the United States. I was waiting. Speaking of that, they're talking about people coming in from the other side, 1, 2, 3. I waited for 3 years. From 1945, I signed up, and even with somebody guaranteeing for me in this country that I will not be a
Financial burden.
right, a financial burden to this country, I waited from 1945 till 1949. Not 45, but I came here when I was in Austria in that camp. I signed up, and it took me that long to come. And by that time, I didn't need anybody because Truman let 100,000 Jews coming in from Germany, So, but somebody signed for me. Oh yeah, I want to tell you a little story about what it means to be naive, which you can afford to be, because being American, okay? I'm just saying, I'm trying to tell you, when I came to this country, and I lived in a place, a Hayas, you know what a Hayas is? Hayas is Hebrew. Anyway, Hebrew, a Jewish organization. Yeah,
Society, right.
They gave me 3 meals a day, and I walked the streets, and I lived in New York for about 2 months. I looked at the high buildings, which I never saw before, and And I walked, and it was fantastic. To me, this was life. This was a paradise to me. 3 meals a day. I walked down. I couldn't speak English, so we wanted to see what the towers looked like. So we went for 2nd Avenue. I walked all the way to 42nd Street. You know what I mean? Because I didn't know how to speak English. But later on, I found out. I looked at the guy. Gee, he looks like he may be Jewish. Maybe he speaks Yiddish. And many Jews in New York speak Yiddish. So I lived there for 2 months, and I got a job in, well, what they call under the table. You know what that means. Anyway, for what, $7, what was it? At that time it was 75 cents an hour, because that was it. That was the minimum wage. I got a job in a factory, in a shop, which supposedly his mother knew my mother, and they were connected by like 42nd cousins to each other, whatever. So they gave me this job, and this man was like 35 years old. I was like 22. And he asked me, you know how to use a machine? I learned in the concentration camp to say, of course I do. My father was a tailor, just to get the job, not to go, get killed or something. So I learned how to do the machine, and I was doing some little stuff with the thing. And the man that owned the place was a young man of 35 years old, little beard, American-born, spoke Yiddish and English very well. The man gave me that job, and he used to go to the temple in the morning to study the very complicated religion. I mean, Gemara. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about. And so we would come back at 10 o'clock, and we used to listen to Arthur Godfrey, music or whatever, and he would shut it off and put on his tape that he did studying from 5 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock. And it was all in Yiddish. And the idea was, that's what I'm talking about, fanatism. He was talking about if a kosher pot, which is for meat, and you cook water in it, and then your little child took a spoon with butter and threw it into the kosher pot, which was for meat, do you have to make the kosher pot kosher or the spoon kosher? Or do you have to make both of them? And this was going for an hour. What I'm trying to say to you, this guy never asked me about the Holocaust or anything else. That's all he saw is God. Instead of helping his people, the Jewish people, he was busy trying to figure out stupid things like this here. And I said to myself, and I just went through a war, starving to death. I would have eaten a horse's ass, excuse me. You know what I mean? It's just, so it's very hard to comprehend what I went through and to tell you, to make anybody understand what it is. And by the way, if you ever want to know who your friends are, if you wind up in a desert and you have to survive, you'll see who is who by then, if he doesn't steal your water or your bread or whatever. So that's about the situation anyway. Anybody else?
Oh, good. I was hoping some students would get courage.
Yep, okay.
So you said you came to the United States in 49?
Yeah.
Some accounts from survivors I've heard have said that they feel like when they like in post-war Europe and in the United States, afterwards they felt like they had like all these experiences, but after the war, no one really wanted to hear it. Like they said, this was such a depressing moment, this was such a depressing time, like all these horrible things happen. Don't talk about it because, like, we just want to move on.
No, I think that the problem is over here, which I said to myself, I'm going to make a statement on that. See, it's not, I don't blame you for not wanting to hear it. They see it in the papers. Unfortunately, they don't see enough of it. What the problem is with the young people speaking to you, many of them, when I used to go to work on a job here, I worked in a meat company and packing meat company. And I would watch the people, I was taking this from Mattapan, or from Dorchester, Eggleston Square to downtown Boston. And on the train, I would see young people like yourself, and they pick up a newspaper, the Herald or Globe or whatever it is, and they look at the front page, the back page, throws it out. And I said to myself, oh my God, I used to pick that paper up and try to figure out what the headline is. I started to read English and trying to understand it. What I'm trying to say is, in this country, because we're such a powerful country, I could say I'm an American citizen right now, so that you don't have to worry about it. Your borders, nothing. But if you are if you are a small country, it's different. So what happens is, you don't have to do it, but you should. You should read the current events. Years ago, when I came to a movie, it would be at least the current events in the beginning. Such and such happened. I'm not talking about who killed who, but what happened in the world, next door neighbor. Maybe they're going to attack you. I know you're very strong, you're big. But now we have people that ISIS, they don't have to, but they can attack you with your chips or whatever you call it, Not that I understand it, but anyways, besides, what I'm trying to say. You have to be aware of what's going on. You have to be into politics to a certain extent. You can't just listen about if Brady won or didn't win, it's nice to know, but you have the luxury of not doing it, but you should, especially now. We're living in a very dangerous world right now. And people say, why do we have wars? See, just my own way of thinking. The problem is like this here. If we take a piece of land next to Russia, Russia says, I better attack now before he walks into my country. And this is what happens. Everybody's trying to take territory. Now Russia is trying to take back a piece of Poland, if he can get away with it. Or a piece of Ukraine that he says used to belong to me years ago. Stalin gave it to me, or whatever. We'll always have war. I cannot see that we will ever have peace. It's just, every day we're like the animal kingdom. We have to kill each other off, to make room for others. I don't know. Maybe you know. But that's not going into this. Anyway, I also want to tell you, this is very important. People ask me, how did you go into business and all that? I want to tell you what happened to me in this country. I'm a survivor of all kinds. I came to this country, and in 1971, I was a salesman on the road. I was shot in a holdup. I'm actually cut in the middle, and I survived that. I was 21 days before I got married. I got married kind of late. I didn't want to get married at all. But my wife said, you're going to marry me one way or the other, dead or alive. You know what I mean? If you know her, you know what I'm talking about. So she nurtured me, and I was 21, and then I was 21 days in the hospital in Peterborough, Brigham, and then I was home for another 8 months, and my wife was working in John Hancock, and I got married. I had supposed to be a wedding of 110 people, and which I don't have any relatives here that much, so that wedding had to be canceled, and they gave me my money back because I was dying. Actually, I was actually dying because my liver was 21 days to be in the hospital. It wasn't easy, and. So after that, and by the way, I'm just going to go back. In 1949, in 1950, I found a job for $1 an hour, and I worked in a meat company. And I worked there for about a year or 2 years maybe. And I worked 75 cents an hour. Then I got a union job from them, and it was $1 an hour. And what I did, I said, I have no trade. I'm a bachelor. I can't afford to go out with a girl, with that money that I made. I lived with my sister at the time because she needed for me to help her pay the bills too, because she didn't work. So anyway, so it gave me an idea. Being a Holocaust survivor, I worked with people. Some of them are Polish, some of them are American, Italian-American, and Jewish, and very few Jewish people there, but a few. It's about 700 people. One day, I went to the synagogue. It's my hearing aid. Yeah. I went to the synagogue, and I didn't want to hang around listening to the prayers, so I went outside and met some of the guys, some of the girls. I was a bachelor at the time, and I was about 22 at that, or 23, something like that. And this American boy, a Jewish boy, he was also didn't want to stay at the prayers, so he was outside with a watch, a Benras. And I said, gee, that's a nice watch. And I said, well, how much, where'd you get it? He says, oh, I work in a place where they sell watches. It was a Benras, $72. He says, I said, you want to sell it? He said, yeah. Well, I paid $53 for it. I said, I'll give you $57. I bought the watch from him, and I went with this watch. Didn't even have anything of mine. So I worked with a guy in that meat company, and I was his helper. He was, anyway, doesn't matter what he was. He was a very amateur actor, plus he was doing what he was doing. He said, I want to buy that watch. So I sold him that watch. He didn't have any money. He had 6 kids. So he paid me $1 a week every week when we got paid. But I charged him $60 or something like that. And that, when I went to buy another watch, I found out where he worked. They gave me 4 watches. You got rid of the other watch? Here's 4 watches. I said, I don't have any money to give you. He said, I know where you live. Sign here, memorandum. I took the 4 watches, I sold it. I speak a few languages, so the best language I could speak is probably, Polish and Russian, and I spoke English already pretty good too. Not very good, but enough to make myself understand. So I sold those watches at a price, and some of them gave me cash. I said, that's a good deal. So while the American boys were talking baseball at lunchtime, or lying to each other that they slept with this girl and that girl and so forth and so on. I remember that because I remember, and I had a friend, Tony Zambella, he says, those idiots, they're probably going to go for a beer. Stay here, stay with me. He used to take care of me anyway. So he introduced me to some others, and plus I got to know all the people that spoke German and Polish and Russian, and I sold them watches. I only made $2,000 a year at that time. I made another $2,000 selling watches at lunchtime. I went out and bought a car for cash, a Ford Fairlane, which was $2,000 at that time, a brand new car. And I said, I'm going to go from door to door. I already had some customers, and they told me about other customers. I became what they call a custom peddler, door to door, $1 a day, $1 when I see you, $1 when I catch you, one of those things. You know what I mean? So I went into business, but then I was shot in a holdup. I told you, I think I mentioned that, did I?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah,
You did mention it.
So this is how I got shot. And that's when I decided I want to go as far away from Boston as possible. And a friend of mine told me there's a guy going out of business. His name is Brenner. The store's name is Brenner's Jewelry Shop. His name was Goldman, but he had a partner, Brenner. Doesn't matter. So I said I didn't have any money to buy the whole store because I lost everything when I didn't work for the 8 months. I couldn't go back to get the rest of the money because I was sick. I lost everything. I lost a lot of money. I had nothing practically, but my wife was still working. So I decided I'll buy the store. And I bought the store. I said, I don't have any money. He wanted $30,000. I said, I don't have any $30,000. So I waited until it was completely empty, and I bought the empty store with the name. But I knew the business because I knew how to sell almost anything, what I went through. So I said, shmati business, what they call, a rag business. So I bought the store, and I found out where to buy everything. And that was in 1971, and I'm still there 40 years later.
Can I get that? Yeah. We've got time really for just,
Okay.
we have time for one more question, which I wanted to ask, which is, I know how difficult it is, because we were talking both physically and emotionally, for you to do these talks. You had difficulty sleeping last night, you were telling me. I hope you don't mind my saying that. And so our last question I would like to ask you is, when did you start speaking publicly in schools and groups about your experience, and why?
Well, the first time I spoke was probably about, the first time I spoke was in Wellesley College. And the reason I did that is because a girl that worked for me, I was a teenager, she wanted to go into college, and I happened to have known the professor in college, which his son married one of my nieces, okay? So anyway, so I got to know him, and he said, send her in, and anyway, she got into college there. While she was in college, she talked to somebody over there about me, who I am, and they invited me to go to talk about it. I didn't expect it. They made me a dinner, and all the professors were there, and all the seniors, college kids, and I was there for about 3 hours talking. And after that, things go around, and then I spoke to CM, CM high school, what do you call it? CM is Catholic Memorial. Yeah, right. I spoke to them. I never forget that, because one nun on this side and the other nun on this side, and I was in the middle. And I said, and they said to me, Mr. Greenfield, they said after that, Aron, don't hold back. Don't worry about our thing. I want you to say everything. If it's against our religion, your religion, whatever. And he said, because we went to Israel, we saw Israel, and we went to Yad Hashem, the thing. So say anything. And then one thing after another, then I spoke to another. So I've been speaking since then quite a bit. But then I stopped for quite a while. I just didn't want to be bothered, because I had nightmares, and my wife, every time I had a nightmare, she woke me up and she pushed me, because I know every time I had a nightmare was that, not concentration camp, but that I'm cornered and there's no way for me to get out. It's like that was always, and I started to, sometimes I would hit her, because I thought I was in a fight, So, but I do it because now I see what's going on, and I have grandchildren, and I want them to know also. That's why I always say, whatever I do, I want something from here or from anybody, so I can show it to them in pictures or whatever, photographs, that who I am and what I'm talking about. Right now, I cannot explain it to them because they're too young. But if they were any older, the oldest one is only 10 years old. So we took him to the Holocaust Memorial, Holocaust in Washington, D.C. They have a special section for younger kids. So he saw that, but I think he still doesn't understand, and I don't care, but it doesn't matter. It's, I hope he doesn't find out the real way, in practice, as they say. No. There's so much more. I should have had maybe a list. My wife would say, why don't you do this and do this and do that?
Please join me in thanking Aron Greenfield.
My wife will be very proud.